I stood in the shadows of the $6.8 million mansion I paid for, watching my 80-year-old mother scrub the marble floors while my brother kicked her cleaning bucket over for missing a spot. Brandon told the Pentagon I died in a helicopter crash in Yemen, so he could cash the check, but he forgot one thing. Navy SEALs don't stay dead, especially when there's a debt of blood to collect. Welcome to Mr. Bryan's Tale, where every story takes you on an unforgettable journey. Whether it's thrilling adventures, heartwarming moments, or tales that'll keep you on the edge of your seat, this is your destination for captivating storytelling. If you love getting lost in exciting narratives and discovering new worlds with every video, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss out on the next amazing tale. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. The fluorescent lights of the small office hummed, a sharp contrast to the silent, tactical world Garrett Cross had inhabited for a decade. Across the desk sat Vanessa Blackwood, a Marine veteran whose sharp eyes hadn't lost their edge in civilian life. She slid a heavy manila folder across the scarred wood, her expression as grim as a casualty report. "You're a ghost, Garrett," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "According to the Department of Defense in the state of California, you've been dead for 6 years. Garrett leaned forward, his scarred knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the desk. He stared at the document on top, a certificate of death, complete with a forged signature from a field officer he knew had died years ago in the same province Brandon claimed Garrett had fallen. "He didn't just move into the house," Garrett rasped, the tactical discipline in his voice masking a tidal wave of fury. "He erased me." Vanessa tapped a bank ledger further down the stack. "It wasn't just about the house. Brandon filed for your $5 million service members group life insurance payout the moment the missing in action status was updated to presumed dead. The money was moved through a series of shell companies before landing in an account used to pay off the back taxes on the Coronado mansion." Garrett felt the betrayal like a jagged blade. The $6.8 million sanctuary he had bled for had been turned into a prison for his mother, funded by the very price Brandon had placed on Garrett's life. He closed the folder with a soft, final thud. The investigation was over. The mission had begun. The humid night air of Coronado felt like a shroud as Garrett Cross moved through the perimeter of the estate he once called a gift. Beside him, Marcus Chun was a shadow among shadows, his tactical pack filled with the silent eyes and ears of modern warfare. They bypassed the high-end security system with the practiced ease of men who had breached far deadlier fortresses. Slipping through a service entrance Marcus had digitally unlocked minutes prior. While Marcus began the surgical installation of microscopic cameras behind crown molding and within smoke detectors, Garrett drifted to the darkened halls of the $6.8 million mansion. The air in the upper floors smelled of expensive lilies and Amber's cloying perfume, but the basement told a different story. It was damp, smelling of neglected concrete and laundry detergent. In the corner, near the small, moth-eaten cot where his mother was forced to sleep, sat a plastic trash bin. Garrett reached in, his hand closing around something cold and metallic. He pulled out a heavy wooden box, its lid cracked. Inside, the silk ribbons of his silver star and purple heart were tangled and stained with coffee grounds. Brandon hadn't just stolen his identity. He had treated Garrett's sacrifice like household refuse. Garrett's jaw tightened, a pulse point thrumming in his neck as he tucked the medals into his tactical vest. He looked up at a small, red blinking light. Marcus had the feed live. The nightmare tapes were officially recording, and every indignity his mother suffered would now be etched into a digital ledger that Brandon could never erase. The blue glow of the monitors reflected in Garrett's eyes, casting a cold, ghostly light across his face as the first 48 hours of footage began to roll. Inside the surveillance van, the silence was heavy, broken only by the low hum of Marcus's servers. The nightmare tapes lived up to their name with agonizing clarity. Garrett watched frozen as Amber entered the kitchen and deliberately swept a porcelain plate off the counter, screaming at Maggie to clean up the mess on her hands and knees. The 80-year-old woman moved with a terrifying frailty, her breath hitching in a way that signaled pure, unfiltered fear. The cruelty only escalated when Brandon appeared. He didn't just ignore his mother. He weaponized her confusion. The cameras captured a chilling scene in the dimly lit dining room, where Brandon hovered over Maggie, a thick stack of legal papers in one hand and a plate of cold food in the other. "Just sign the transfer, Mom, and you can eat," he hissed, his voice a jagged contrast to the caring son persona he projected to the world. Maggie's hand shook so violently she could barely hold the pen, her eyes darting toward the door as if praying for a ghost to walk through it. Garrett felt a white-hot pressure building in his chest, the kind of rage that usually preceded a breach. He watched Amber mock Maggie's dementia, laughing as she told the elderly woman that Garrett had died because he didn't love her enough to stay. It was a psychological execution, recorded in high definition. Garrett's fist tightened until his tendons groaned. He had seen enough. The mission was no longer just about rescue. It was about total systemic destruction. The pursuit of justice led Garrett away from the shadows of the mansion and into the sterile, deceptive world of high-end private medicine. He tracked Dr. Richard Caldwell to a clinic that looked more like a five-star hotel than a doctor's office, a facility funded by the kickbacks of predatory guardianships. While Garrett's presence remained a silent threat in the periphery, he funneled Caldwell's digitized medical files to Dr. Sarah Martinez, an honest VA physician who knew the weight of a soldier's trust. Meeting Sarah in the dim light of a secure parking garage, Garrett watched her flip through the records with a deepening scowl. "This isn't dementia, Garrett," she said, her voice tight with professional indignation. She pointed to a series of prescriptions Caldwell had authorized, high-dosage sedatives and cognitive suppressants that were being administered to Maggie daily. "These levels are designed to induce confusion and lethargy. He isn't treating her. He's chemically lobotomizing her so she can't fight back against Brandon's legal maneuvers." The revelation was a tactical pivot for Garrett. It meant his mother wasn't lost to age. She was being buried alive in her own mind by a man who had sworn an oath to heal. Sarah handed him a signed affidavit, a medical counterstrike that would strip Brandon of his legal shield when the time came. Garrett tucked the document into his jacket, his expression as cold as a winter sea. He now had the medical proof of the fraud, but he wanted Brandon to lose everything, not just his freedom, but his pride. It was time to put on the suit and become Stephen Hartley. Garrett shed his tactical gear for a bespoke charcoal suit and a pair of Italian leather shoes, a transformation that replaced the scarred operator with the image of effortless wealth. His Stephen Hartley persona was more than just a disguise. It was a psychological weapon designed to exploit the one thing Brandon valued more than family: greed. He arrived at the high-end steakhouse in a rented luxury sedan, his posture radiating the bored confidence of a man who moved millions with a signature. Brandon was already there, his eyes lighting up at the sight of the expensive watch on Garrett's wrist, the first bait in a meticulously laid trap. As they sat across from each other, Garrett spoke in the smooth, calculated tones of a Seattle real estate mogul. He spoke of coastal development and land use rights, spinning a narrative that made the $6.8 million Coronado mansion seem like a mere stepping stone. "I'm looking for a flagship property," Garrett lied, leaning back as the wine was poured. "I know your home isn't officially on the market, but I'm prepared to offer $9.5 million in a direct, all-cash transaction to avoid the public listing." The effect was instantaneous. Brandon's facade of sentimental family heritage crumbled as he calculated a nearly $3 million profit in his head. His hands, the same hands that had forced Maggie to sign away her life, now trembled with the anticipation of a fresh payday. "I think we can find a way to make that work, Stephen," Brandon said, his voice thick with a hunger that disgusted Garrett to his core. The hook was set. Brandon was now eager to lead the hunter right into the heart of his fortress. The sun glinted off the Pacific as Garrett, wearing the skin of Stephen Hartley, stepped back into the mansion he had built with his own blood and sweat. Brandon walked beside him, chest puffed out with the unearned arrogance of a man who believed he'd finally hit the jackpot. Hidden beneath the lapel of Garrett's bespoke jacket, a high-definition lens captured every move, every sneer, and every lie. As they moved through the vaulted foyer, Brandon gestured vaguely toward a framed photo in the hallway, one Garrett had forgotten existed. "This house has a bit of history," Brandon remarked, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "My brother, Michael, he was a Navy SEAL. Died a hero in Yemen 6 years ago. Broke our mother's heart, of course, but it's why I take such good care of her now." Garrett felt a surge of lethal pressure in his chest, his tactical brain cataloging the statement as a definitive kill shot for the upcoming legal battle. He watched Brandon's mouth move, weaving a web of false sentimentality about a brother he had erased for a payday. "A hero's legacy," Garrett replied, his voice a low, dangerous velvet. "It's a shame he isn't here to see the profit you're making off his sacrifice." Brandon laughed, oblivious to the wolf standing in his living room. He was always more about duty than money. "Me? I'm more of a realist." Garrett looked toward the basement door, his jaw set. The reconnaissance was complete. The Stephen Hartley persona had served its purpose. It was time to stop being a buyer and start being a reckoning. "The basement is just a disaster zone of old furniture and dust," Brandon said, his voice tightening as Garrett stepped toward the heavy, locked door at the end of the hall. "Not worth the developer's time, Stephen." Garrett didn't hesitate. He placed a firm hand on the wood, feeling the unnatural resistance of a deadbolt that shouldn't have been there. "I'm a thorough man, Brandon," Garrett replied, his voice losing its polished Seattle charm and taking on a cold, metallic edge. With a controlled surge of tear, one strength, he shouldered the door open, the frame splintering with a sound like a gunshot. The room was a tomb. In the dim light of a single bare bulb, Maggie sat on a thin cot, her small frame trembling as she clutched a tattered blanket. Brandon scrambled behind him, his face pale. "She's confused. I told you, her dementia makes her hide down here." Garrett ignored the frantic lies, his heart fracturing as he knelt before his mother. He reached up and pulled off the designer glasses, wiping away the Stephen Hartley facade. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking for the first time in a decade. Maggie looked up, her clouded eyes searching his face, drifting over the scars that weren't there 10 years ago. For a moment, the chemical fog induced by Caldwell seemed to lift. Her hand, paper-thin and shaking, reached out to touch his cheek. "Michael?" she breathed, using the name his brother had tried to bury. Garrett caught her hand and kissed her palm, his eyes locking onto a terrified Brandon. "The seal is home, Mom, and the nightmare ends right now." Brandon fumbled for his smartphone, his thumb dancing frantically over the screen to call his private security detail, but his eyes widened as he realized the signal bars had flatlined to zero. Outside in the surveillance van, Marcus Chun had activated the military-grade jammer, severing the mansion's digital ties to the world and trapping the villains in a blackout of their own making. The high society music on the floors above was suddenly cut short by the rhythmic, heavy thud of tactical boots and the piercing shriek of sirens tearing to the Coronado night. Vanessa Blackwood strode into the basement, her silhouette framed by the flashing blue and red lights of the Coronado Police Department. She wasn't just holding a briefcase. She was holding the legal hammer that would shatter Brandon's life. Beside her stood a high-ranking officer and the district attorney, clutching the warrants Garrett's team had meticulously built from the nightmare tapes and Sarah Martinez's medical reports. "Brandon Cross, you are under arrest for insurance fraud, identity theft, and aggravated elder abuse," the officer announced, his voice echoing off the cold basement walls. Brandon let out a strangled cry as he was forced against the concrete he had once used to imprison his mother. The plastic zip ties hissed shut around his wrists with finality that signaled the end of his $6.8 million charade. Upstairs, Amber's indignant screams faded as she, too, was led away in handcuffs. Vanessa stepped toward Garrett, handing him a notarized document that officially rescinded his death certificate. Garrett didn't look at the paper. He kept his eyes on Maggie, whose hand remained locked in his. The ghost had officially returned to the land of the living, and his first act was to carry his mother out of the darkness and into the light. Would you like me to conclude the story with Chapter 9, where Garrett and Maggie find their final piece and a new beginning? The $6.8 million mansion, once a monument to Brandon's greed, was swiftly purged of his presence, the echoes of his betrayal replaced by the quiet efficiency of professional movers clearing away the remnants of a stolen life. Garrett didn't want the house. The marble floors and ocean views were stained by the memory of Maggie's suffering. After a week of intensive recovery under Dr. Sarah Martinez's care, Maggie's strength began to return, the chemical fog finally lifting to reveal the sharp, resilient woman who had raised a warrior. As the sun began to dip toward the Pacific, casting a bruised purple hue over the horizon, Garrett sat with his mother on the deck of a modest, beautiful craftsman home he had purchased in her name, a true sanctuary. He revealed the final truth he had kept hidden. His decade in the shadows had not only honed his skills, but had amassed a fortune in private security and forgotten investments that dwarfed Brandon's theft. "We're set for life, Mom," he said softly, sliding a bank statement across the table. "No more missions, no more ghosts." Maggie leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand finally steady as she gripped his. The nightmare was over. The villains were facing decade behind bars, and the son she thought she had lost was home for good. They watched the stars emerge over the water. Two survivors of silent war finally finding their peace in the cool evening air. The debt was paid, the family was restored, and for the first time in 60 years, Garrett Cross was exactly where he was meant to be. The shadows of the $6.8 million mansion have finally faded, replaced by the warmth of a home built on truth rather than treachery. Garrett Cross proved that while you can forge a death certificate, you can't bury the spirit of a Navy SEAL or the bond between a mother and her son. Brandon and Amber learned the hard way that greed has a high price. One paid in decades of prison time and the total loss of the empire they stole. As Garrett and Maggie watched the sunset over a new horizon, justice isn't just a memory. It's their reality.
What would you have done if you walked into your own home and realized your family had erased your existence? Would you have stayed in the shadows to build a case like Garrett? Or would you have confronted them right then and there? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey of betrayal and ultimate reckoning, make sure to subscribe to Mr. Brian's Tale for more thrilling stories of justice and survival. Don't miss out on our next tale. Hit that notification bell to join the community.